Even before the war had ended, people started thinking about where to site memorials to those that had sacrificed their lives during the Great War. In Ilfracombe, there was a body of opinion that didn't favour anything placed on the seafront. Churches, churchyards and the area around them were the most popular choice. But here on Plymouth Hoe, there was already a precedent for memorials and monuments. Drake's statue was unveiled on the promenade in 1884. 4 years later, 300 years after the actual event, the Armada Tercentenary Memorial was unveiled here at the eastern end of the promenade. Less than a decade after the Armada Memorial was unveiled, Britain was at war again, this time in South Africa. 250,000 men were involved and some 5,000 were killed. And here is the National Memorial to the South African War, the Boer War, on the northwestern corner of the Citadel, unveiled by Lady Aubrey Buller in 1903, less than 12 months after the conclusion of the war in South Africa. It would take the authorities a lot longer to realise any plans for memorials commemorating the end of the Great War in Plymouth. There are over 2,000 war memorials in Devon, and each one of them took time. People had to decide what form it would take, where it would be put, and when it should be unveiled. There are over 250 crosses scattered around, but most take different forms. Some are recreation halls, one was even a library, a church wing in Exeter. But here in Plymouth in 1923, this, one of the few statues to victory, was unveiled here on the corner of Lockyer Street and Citadel Road. Work of the Scottish sculptor Bernie Rind, the figure of victory stands 8'4" tall, slightly larger than life size, and traditionally has the laurel wreath in one hand and a sword in the other. At the unveiling in 1923, Lord Derby announced to a 20,000 strong crowd here that this should be a deterrent to war in the future, that future generations should know what war means, and that every town and every parish should know the toll that the war has made in our midst. While he was here, the Lord Mayor and the Secretary of State for War, Lord Derby, placed within this area here the roll of honour inscribed with the names of those who made the great sacrifice. A duplicate copy is available, but there's names of some 2,000 men and 1 woman in this roll buried beneath that stone. Four bronze statues representing the 4 winds of heaven sit atop Sir Robert Lorimer's 100-foot obelisk here on Plymouth Hoe. It's the finest war memorial in Devon and one of 3 identical memorials built to recognise those who have no other graves but the sea. There's similar naval memorials in Portsmouth and Chatham. And at the base of it, 4 lions finely hewn by Henry Poole. It is an altogether impressive structure, and there are some 7,250 odd names recorded on it, each one of them demonstrating part of the price paid for the victory in the Great War. It was unveiled by George V's 5th son, Prince George, later Duke of Kent, who tragically would lose his own life in the second great conflict some 25 years later. Just as there was more than one design proposed for Plymouth's own war memorial for the Great War, so there were other designs proposed for the Hoe site here as well. In fact, one of them was a simple cenotaph set so that the date would have been at the northern, therefore dark end of the structure, and the simple word remembrance at the sunny southern side of the cenotaph. But that was a proposal that didn't see light of day at the end. Of all three of the main memorials on Plymouth Hoe to the Great War, the first to be unveiled was this, erected by the Royal Marines in November 1921 and designed by a former Marine himself, W.G. Storr Barber. The striking centrepiece showing a naked warrior wrestling with the eagle of imperialism. The crosses at each of Plymouth's three main cemeteries, Efford, Weston Mill and here at Ford Park, are modelled on Sir Reginald Blomfeld's Sword of Sacrifice. The traditional Celtic, runic, Latin cross, he said, had no place to describe the grim realities, the grim terrors of the trenches, and instead he designed a simple cross with a sword pointing down, which he felt better captured the spirit of the time. Rather like the memorial on Plymouth Hoe, the memorial in Efford Cemetery has had a Second World War extension. This was the original part to honour the memory of the sailors and soldiers who gave their lives for their country in the Great War and who lie buried in this cemetery. But it's not just our own soldiers and sailors that are here. There are men commemorated from all over the Commonwealth, from Australia, from Canada, from New Zealand, South Africa, the West Indies, India, and even other places like Greece and China, people that were part of the war effort and lost their lives during that conflict on behalf of the Allies. Buried in amongst the many Commonwealth graves in Efford Cemetery are a number of Chinese Labour Corps men. These were men that were brought over at the suggestion of Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig in 1916 and thereafter, totalling 120,000 before the end of the war. They helped, because they weren't part of a belligerent nation, behind the Allied lines. Many of them died helping in action, but some of them died as a result of the Spanish flu pandemic that swept the world after the end of the First World War. But they're here, most of them known only by an impersonal reference number initially, and this cemetery here has the largest number, 8, albeit just 8, of any cemetery in mainland UK. The 10 Greeks buried here were crewmen on the George M. Embidikos, which was travelling from Buenos Aires to Brixham with a freight of maize and was sunk by a German U-boat in May 1916, one of many vessels, over 30 vessels in a 6 or 7 month period that were sunk by the Germans, and over 140 lives were lost. At the same time, over 100 British warships were sunk, with an even greater loss of life. At Weston Mill, the main memorial is identical to the one at Efford Cemetery, and in addition we have a small cenotaph commemorating again the lives of those lost in both World Wars. There are a similar number of military and naval personnel buried here and at Efford. Best part of 400 here, half of them in this one area concentrated to the northeast of the chapel in Weston Mill Cemetery. The wording on war memorials varies from one parish to the next. Here at Plympton St Maurice, it reads quite simply, "In grateful memory of the men of Plympton St Maurice who laid down their lives in the Great War for freedom and justice." And the memorial sits right at the heart of the parish in the shadow of the castle and just yards from Plympton St Maurice Parish Church. The public cenotaph wasn't the first Plympton memorial, however. There was one inside St Maurice Church, but that was a wall tablet, and the parishioners didn't feel that that really did the job justice. And so They petitioned, and with the benefit of finance raised by a mile of pennies, they produced the current First World War memorial. The new cenotaph was unveiled 2 years after the tablet had appeared on the wall in the church originally, and tragically, on the eve of the unveiling of the new memorial, James Roberts, a local man, died of injuries sustained in 1916, 8 years earlier, when he was 22. Plymstock's main memorial is here at the top of Burrow Hill on an ancient burial mound, and like the others, this simple stone cross has been adapted to incorporate the names of those who lost their lives in the Second World War as well as the First. And the legend here reads, "For God, for country, and for you we died." One of the more modest memorials locally is this wall-mounted tribute to the men of Lara who fell during the Great War. The Lara men, and also some of the officers and men of the East Lancashire Regiment who were stationed here during that period. And the legend here, "Greater love hath no man than this." One of the most expensive war memorials in the county of Devon is here in Devonport Park. Unveiled in 1923, it shows just how reluctant Devonport were to accept that they had now been part of an amalgamated Plymouth for 9 years. They have the old Devonport Borough crest at the front of this Charles Cheverton Memorial, which has the figure of victory at the bottom of a 33-foot Cornish granite plinth. It commemorates the lives of some 2,000 Devonport men and women who lost their lives in the Great War.